It was 2:15 in the morning on August 12, 1942, at the harbor of Alexandria in Egypt. The sea was far too calm in a way that was unsettling. Even the lightest breath sounded like a huge crash under the water. Down in the dark under the harbor, two figures slipped along like shadows in black ink. Their bubbles floated up and disappeared before they reached the surface. They were very careful about how much air they used because they needed it to live. These were Italian naval divers, frogmen from the Decima Flotilla Mass, the Axis power's boldest, most risky underwater sabotage team. Luigi Ferraro, a lieutenant, stopped and put one hand in a glove on a steel post, all covered in rust. In front of them, the dim shape of a British destroyer's hull shimmered. It was painted black to hide it and protected by sonar webs to pick up on anything moving too quickly or making too much of a sound. He could almost feel his heartbeat booming in his ears. He turned a little wheel on his air tank, changing the mix. Emilio Traversi, his corporal, tapped once on his helmet, the quiet instruction to stop breathing. The sonar was doing a search. A soft ping rang out through the black water. Another one came, and this one rolled like the sound of thunder far below the surface, making their very bones vibrate. Ferraro let his breath out, not quickly, but as a very quiet stream of bubbles. The air seemed to just slide from his lips, disappearing before the sonar could get another reading. This was his special skill, something the British engineers hadn't even considered. He wasn't simply going underwater, he was becoming part of the sea, breathing in a way that made him unseen. The British had become a bit too confident with their harbor defenses. Their mine netting, magnetic detectors, and the sonar that was always listening. None of them could find a man who moved as if he was the ocean. Most divers exhale in a rhythmic burst of bubbles, and early sonar easily picked those up. Ferraro, though, had constructed a unique mask, a bubble mask that tricked the machines. When the Italians initially saw it, they thought he'd completely lost it. Now it was the thing keeping them alive. He'd altered his closed-circuit breathing system so that with each exhale, the air flowed back into the system, going through a filter containing sodium hydroxide crystals. The chemical changed the carbon dioxide and crucially created no bubbles, no sound, no sign of him. His adversaries were listening for breaths that simply weren't happening. Above them, HMS Airage, a British destroyer, rocked gently in the Mediterranean moonlight, and its sonar officer yawned into his tea. The screen showed nothing. The radar was calm. "All's quiet," he mumbled, and didn't realize that 60 feet under the ship, fate was slowly, steadily approaching. Ferraro gave the signal to move again. The seabed was now inclining upwards, toward the British ships at anchor. Hidden by a hanging veil of algae, the divers spotted the dark chain of sonar buoys, their little sensors glowing a faint red. The harbor was meant to be impossible to penetrate, and yet here he was, a phantom in the depths. Each action meant trading precious seconds for complete silence. One slip, one escaping puff of bubbles, and they'd be detected. The sonar would wail, the destroyer would launch depth charges, and there would be absolutely no second chance. He detached a cylindrical item from his belt, a limpet mine looking like a metal turtle. It had a magnet, a timer, and was brutally simple in its design. A weapon intended not for massive explosion, but for messing with the British mindset. The British leadership couldn't figure out why their ships kept blowing up in harbors that should have been safe. They blamed errors, sabotage, or just bad luck. Ferraro knew differently. Luck had nothing to do with it. He drifted under the destroyer's hull, hearing the quiet humming of the engines above, and imagining the crew enjoying their coffee, composing letters, and having no idea just how precarious their security was. His hands were completely stable as he set the timer for 2 hours. If all went according to plan, by morning, the Airage would be nothing more than wreckage scattered all over the bay. But as Ferraro turned to leave, a sudden beam of light flashed in the water, a lamp from a British patrol diver swinging from the harbor wall. Traversi froze. The sonar operator above must have sensed something. Ferraro flattened himself against the steel of the hull. Even his pulse felt dangerous. The light moved closer. 2 more pings. Louder this time. Then quiet. He didn't dare inhale. For a full 60 seconds, No one did a thing. The ocean enveloped everything. The patrol diver's light passed over him, searching the darkness, and paused. For a beat too long, Ferraro's thoughts flew. Had the bubble mask really fooled the sonar, or had the British worked out his trick? He could almost see them tightening the nets, improving their equipment, and working out what he'd done. But as the light moved away and the sound of the patrol diver receded, he had his answer. The mask had done the trick. It worked flawlessly. He gave Traversy a nudge. It was time to leave. Both men kicked their fins in unison, leaving behind only the gentle rhythm of the ocean, high above. 5 hours later, but for the sound repeats. 3 muffled thuds in a rapid sequence, and then stillness. Durand de la Penne's heart rate increases sharply. This is the emergency signal from the Decima mast divers, a hand-striking metal, a muffled sound within the water. It's a warning, a request for assistance, and a painful indication that their time is limited. He reacts at once. With a flat hand, Durand indicates to Bianchi that he should continue on their current heading, using escape route 2. Firmly holding on to the underside of the ship, Durand goes into the dark and murky water. The disturbed sediment swirls around him, like smoke, completely obscuring the light. The harbor closes around him, becoming a place of gray steel, dark ropes, and the sounds of machinery, somewhere above and out of sight. With each beat of his heart, the sound is more noticeable, made stronger by the area around his ears with the mask. Approximately 5 meters in front of him, he sees a reflection, a slight movement. Durand stabilizes himself, focuses his vision, and there he is. A diver trapped in the anti-submarine netting. The diver's breathing apparatus tube is twisted, and his leg is firmly caught between the woven steel cables. The man's eyes, visible through the misted glass of his mask, are wide and shaking from the cold and the chilling realization that the sea does not overlook errors. This is Lieutenant Gianfranco Paglia. They undertook extensive stealth deployment exercises together in the concealed docks of La Spezia. Paglia was intended to be closer to the pier, fixing timed explosives to the internal supply ships. How had he ended up so far from his position? Durand approaches carefully, making sure he doesn't make contact with the netting. The mesh is carrying an electrical current, and touching it could send a surge of electricity upwards, alerting those on the surface. Durand makes a gesture with 2 fingers, telling Paglia to remain motionless. However, Paglia's regulator is shaking, showing that he is becoming increasingly anxious. Durand works quickly. He removes the sheath from his diving knife, carefully positions the blade under the tangled rope, and starts to cut. Each movement of the knife seems incredibly loud compared to the ocean. His wrist shakes, and his muscles ache from the exertion and his fear. Then, a deep humming sound travels through the water. The hydrophone towers positioned above them are operating once more. Ping, a brief pause. Ping. This pattern travels with the flow of the water, like a hidden pulse. He controls his breathing, inhaling, holding it, then breathing out through the rebreather system. Absolutely no bubbles are created. Paglia's chest begins to shake with the need for air. His mask, unfortunately, isn't to be used in silence. Breathing normally causes a slight cloud of escaping gas to rise slowly from each exhale. Durand is suddenly, and with terror, still. On the sonar screens above, these bubbles will form a soft, indistinct shape, a small indication in the background noise, but something nonetheless. The guards might investigate. He has only a few seconds. He pulls the net apart, getting the final piece of cord to break. Paglia is released, but the forceful movement sends them both upwards. Their fins scrape against the metal of the ship above them. A loud clang, the sound echoing quickly in the water. Durand grabs Paglia's harness and drags him down into the murky cloud of stirred-up sediment under the ship. Above them, voices are heard distantly in the water. Lights are moved, and a spotlight comes on, its beam cutting into the dark, green water. Divers will be in the water within minutes. Durand touches Paglia's breathing tube, and then points to his mask. The bubbles, the sound. Paglia understands, and nods slowly, his eyes holding a feeling more significant than fear. Regret. Both of them understand the implications of what they must do. Durand searches in his equipment bag. Inside, he finds an extra experimental rebreather hood. It's small, unreliable, and has barely been tested. Carbon dioxide builds up in it too quickly, and prolonged use will cause death, but it makes no sound. He gives it to Paglia. The lieutenant pauses, then switches to the new hood. At first, nothing happens with the first breath. With the next, complete silence. No bubbles, no sign of them. Only two figures crouching under the hull of the Italian vessel, surrounded by death pretending to be safety. Durand looks at his watch. 2:41 a.m., 19 minutes until the explosives detonate. They begin to move back towards the exit nets, moving smoothly and quietly, and guided by the faint glowing of the tiny sea creatures drifting in the water. For a moment, it almost appears lovely, as if the ocean itself is letting go of their wrongdoing. Then, a shockwave travels along the seabed, an explosion happening some distance away, and before they expected. It isn't their charge. Durand is startled and looks up, his eyes widening. A stream of bubbles rises about half a kilometer away, covering the surface in white foam. Another team has been found. The harbor's defensive systems are now fully active. The sonar signals have changed. Faster, more defined, and actively searching. Durand turns to Paglia. They are enclosed beneath a group of ships. The explosives are set, alarms are sounding, and the only way out is through a net charged with electricity. The harbor is in complete disarray. Italian sailors are rushing along the docks above, loudly calling out directions. Bright floodlights are sweeping across the dark water in an irregular fashion as they cut through the falling rain. The sonar stations are emitting a keen hum like agitated insects, sending out quicker, more focused sound waves. Near Dock T3, an explosion continues to reverberate, echoing within the large ships at anchor in the bay. Those defending La Spezia believe they've located the enemy. They are mistaken. They are looking for sounds, for some sign of motion, for bubbles. And underneath them, two men are moving in a silence that is almost unearthly. Durand de la Pen presses his hand against the harbor wall for balance against the current. Paglia floats behind, his chest rising and falling softly under the thin metallic covering of his new breathing apparatus. Their lives now entirely depend on this mask, a largely untested piece of naval equipment that could either keep them alive or poison them before morning. Durand indicates that Paglia should follow. Paglia offers a weak nod. Together they move along the seabed, navigating by the feel of their fingertips scraping against the rough stone. Above them, the sonar's pings sound like ghostly footsteps in the darkness. The pressure, the intense cold, can almost be felt working its way through the rubber of their suits. They have been submerged for 50 minutes now. Their muscles are losing strength, their blood feels heavy, and their ears are aching from the depth. However, the harbor's surrounding net is visible ahead, glowing softly, a barrier of steel and electricity with patrol boats dragging floodlights along its length. Durand descends into the layer of silt, assessing the situation. To go directly through the net would be fatal. The current will push them against the electrified mesh. Luckily, the net does not extend all the way to the seafloor, a flaw he recalled from his training. There is a small opening, just over half a meter above the mud. It will be sufficient, but only if they lie as flat as possible and remain calm. He drops to the seabed. Soft clouds of mud and decaying plankton are kicked up around him. He signals Paglia. Inching forward, millimeter by millimeter, they crawl beneath the lowest section of the steel. The whole of their existence shrinks to the act of breathing. The quiet hiss of the scrubber, the slow rhythm of their lungs laboring against the water pressure. Paglia's glove brushes against the net and a spark jumps, a small crackle. Insignificant on its own, but will it be noticeable on the sonar? Durand becomes completely still. Another ping comes from the surface. This one is longer. The search continues, and the sonar is listening. The next 5 seconds feel to stretch on forever. Paglia's eyes are flickering, his pupils have expanded due to an imbalance of oxygen. His body is starting to shake from the buildup of carbon dioxide, a fault with the silent mask. It does not filter quickly enough. With each passing minute, the pressure on his blood increases. Another minute, and he will lose consciousness. Durand pulls him forward. The gap becomes slightly wider. Dark water beyond, and beyond that, the open sea. Safety. A sparkle draws his attention, a new shape above the barrier, too streamlined to be wreckage, too purposeful to be the effect of the current. Another diver, a guard patrol. Durand and Paglia press themselves completely flat against the seabed. Only their eyes move. The guard's propulsion fin stirs the murky water a few meters away. A line is attached to his waist, a sonar probe. Basic, yet dangerous. It gauges changes in water pressure. If it detects any unusual disturbance, it will send an alert to the listening station. Durand slows his breathing to a very shallow inhale every 12 seconds. He marks the passage of time by the beat of his pulse in his throat. The guard's fin passes over them. The probe swings lazily, emitting a soft hum, and then stops, pivoting towards their location. Durand's hand tightens on the knife concealed at his side. He does not want to use it. Blood in the water will reveal their position. But if the guard descends another meter, a current from the surface. Engines start up above the harbor. Searchlights suddenly rotate eastward, away from them. Another alarm sounds somewhere else. Another flare ascends. The guard looks back, unsure, and then rises toward the light. Durand breathes out. They free themselves from the final strand of the net, becoming weightless once more. They are surrounded by open water, colder, darker, and quieter. Paglia moves, his mouthpiece shaking. Durand grasps his shoulder, shaking him gently. His eyes roll, then focus, though with difficulty. He is losing consciousness. Durand checks his timer. 3 minutes until the charges detonate. The explosives under the captured steamer are ready. The remainder of the Decima mass are likely already retreating, or are lying motionless on the seabed. That is no longer important. What is essential is surviving the explosion's radius. They swim underwater, each kick exhausting their remaining strength. Behind them, La Spezia's lower harbor is dimly lit by roving spotlights and naval lights. The rain is getting heavier, beating against the water and creating waves. Then, silence descends. The world shrinks. For a moment, even the ocean itself seems to pause. A column of fire and metal erupts from the harbor, dividing the night. The shock wave slams into them like a hammer, flinging both men through whirling debris. Durand's mask is briefly flooded. Salt water stings his throat. Paglia's regulator is ripped off. He fumbles with it, struggling. Durand reaches out, grabs him, and forces the valve back into position. Above them, everything is chaos. Ships are tilting, alarms are blaring, and smoke is twisting like dark fabric against the lightning-lit sky. Durand and Paglia lie completely flat on the seafloor, moving only their eyes. A guard's fin propels him through the murky water just a few meters away, and attached to his waist is a sonar probe. This is a simple device but very effective. It detects changes in water pressure. Any unusual disturbance, and it will send an alert to the listening station. Durand's breathing becomes incredibly slow, a very shallow breath every 12 seconds, and he tracks the rhythm by feeling his own pulse. The guard's fin brushes past them. The probe swings around slowly, emitting a quiet hum, then stops, turning in their direction. Durand tightens his grip on the knife he has concealed on his thigh. He's reluctant to use it because blood dispersing in the water will reveal their location, but if the guard comes down another meter, a current from the surface causes engines to start up over the harbor. Searchlights abruptly rotate east, moving away from where they are. Another alarm sounds somewhere, and a flare is launched into the sky. The guard looks back, unsure of what to do, and then rises up toward the light. Durand lets out his breath. They free themselves from the final section of the net and are once more weightless. They are surrounded by open water, colder, darker, and quieter. Paglia moves, his mouthpiece shaking. Durand grips his companion's shoulder, shaking him gently. Paglia's eyes roll back, then focus, though only with difficulty. He is losing consciousness. Durand checks his timer. The explosives are set to detonate in 3 minutes. The explosives attached to the captured steamer are activated. The remainder of the Decima mass team may already be retreating or may already be lying motionless on the seabed. That is no longer relevant. Surviving the blast zone is the current priority. They swim away underwater with all their remaining strength, each kick exhausting. Behind them, the lower portion of La Spezia harbor is dimly lit by moving spotlights and naval lights. The rain is getting heavier, creating waves on the water's surface. Then, a profound silence descends. The world shrinks. Even the sea itself seems to pause. From the harbor, a massive column of fire and metal explodes into the night. The shockwave slams into them as if from a hammer, throwing both men into swirling wreckage. Duran's mask fills with water for a moment, and the salt burns his throat. Paglia's regulator is ripped off. He flails about in panic. Duran dives forward, grabs him, and shoves the valve back into place. Above, there is pandemonium. Ships are listing, alarms are deafening, and smoke is curling like dark fabric in the lightning-streaked sky. Duran looks back at the harbor one last time. Through the falling fire and spray, he can just discern the outline of their target as it sinks. The troop carrier, its hull broken, slowly inclining towards the seabed. The Italian High Command will assume a submarine penetrated their defenses, and they will never discover what truly occurred. 2 men and diving equipment that allowed them to become unseen. Paglia's hand slips from Duran's shoulder and his body becomes slack. Duran grabs him again, his heart pounding, observing the faint trail of bubbles escaping from Paglia's mouthpiece. Carbon dioxide poisoning is likely from being too long with the malfunctioning scrubber. He cannot abandon him. However, the harbor searchlights are swinging around, focusing on the blast area, and in their path, the next sonar pulse is now pointed straight at Duran's location. He feels it, as though he is being scrutinized by sound. A single breath could be fatal. Holding Paglia's body, Duran turns toward the open ocean and kicks into the darkness past the breakwater, as another explosion turns the harbor behind him into a roaring blaze. When he finally glances back, the lights of La Spezia have disappeared. Only the rain and the silence are left. But far below the surface, something unexpected is moving. A response not from deterioration or machinery, but from something else in motion. A sonar signal bounces off an approaching form from the open sea. It is not an ally. The returning sonar pulse cuts through the water with an unnervingly precise, sharp, and methodical quality that is not natural. Duran, in the middle of a fin kick, immediately shuts off the small turning valve on his breathing apparatus to eliminate even the quietest hiss. He looks into the darkness. At first, nothing is visible, but then a dim form begins to appear from the darkness. It is long and slim, with propellers turning slowly, almost respectfully. This is not a submarine, but something smaller, more streamlined. A boat utilized by patrolmen, adapted for tracking in shallow waters. Specifically, it is one of Italy's own anti-sabotage ships, originally created by Decima Mass to find enemies in a situation much like their own. He is acutely aware of the irony in this. Those who are typically doing the hunting are now being hunted. Duran conceals himself behind a fractured, upstanding piece of rock on the ocean floor. Paglia's body, attached by the harness, drifts beside him. Every movement must be carefully managed, as every bubble released could be a disaster. The searchlight from the patrol boat pierces the water, a pale beam that would send fish fleeing and stop anyone's heartbeat. It goes within 10 meters, showing shoals of disturbed sediment and broken shells. The beam briefly touches Duran's mask and then passes on. A voice from the sonar operator on deck, a low rumble that travels through the hull of the ship, can be heard over the boat's speakers. The sonar pulse becomes weaker. The patrol boat turns away, pursuing false sonar readings left by the explosion, chasing illusions and remaining ignorant of the fact that the actual targets are just a few inches beneath them. Duran presses his helmet gently against Paglia's, as if by touching him he can somehow restore life to his companion. Paglia's pulse is very weak, yet it is present. There is a small spark of hope, but time is quickly running out. The harbor behind them continues to burn, turning the sky a dull orange that spreads across the clouds like a large open wound. Looking at his watch, he notes the time. 3:04 a.m. They have drifted nearly 600 meters past the harbor's defenses. They are safe, at least for the moment, but each minute increases the danger of carbon dioxide poisoning. He adjusts the scrubber valve on Paglia's breathing equipment and gently angles him upwards toward the faint light above, which represents the possibility of air. The seabed recedes, and the world becomes brighter and less dense. With each meter gained, the night undergoes a transformation. The murky water becomes pale green, and the shapes of the surface begin to gleam. Durand surfaces first. The cold air rushes over his face, a shockingly pleasant sensation. He removes his mask and breathes in the salty wind as if he were being born again. Waves splash against his hood and into his mouth. The smell of gasoline and smoke is on his tongue. His eyes look for the shoreline. Dark forms, cliffs barely visible in the moonlight. Lerici, a tranquil bay where friendly ships could be found, is somewhere to the east. Paglia below him floats motionless. Durand pulls him up, keeping his head above the waves. "Hang in there, my friend," he says quietly. "We are almost there." Then, quiet, and after that, a final breath that is not followed by another. Durand's own breathing hitches. He recognizes this sound. The sea is claiming what is owed to it. He remains motionless for a considerable period, allowing the waves to carry them. The night around him smells of explosives and rain, and the harbor fire has diminished to distant rumbling sounds. In the quiet, he experiences a very old feeling, the unusual calmness of those who have fulfilled their responsibilities and survived to recall them. He holds Paglia firmly by the shoulders and starts swimming for the far shore. The mask, still secured around his neck, is trailing alongside, a muted memory and a device for being unseen, now of no consequence. La Spezia, though damaged and devastated, yet still standing, is somewhere behind him. The assault will be the basis of stories told by those in the mess halls, a further example of the fact that the best defenses can be beaten by determination and a diver's ability to operate without exhaling. Many hours later, as pink light from the dawn colors the horizon, Durand pulls himself onto a jagged section of coastline. His legs are unbearably hot, and his lungs are desperately seeking air. He falls down next to Paglia's body, with the waves reaching to their feet. Above them, seagulls are circling, not particularly interested in the extraordinary events of the night. Italian authorities further away will get a puzzling communication. Numerous ships are destroyed, there were no sonar warnings, and no enemy submarines were found. They will decide it was sabotage, but they will not understand how. They will not imagine that it was born from a straightforward deduction in a workshop in a neglected area of La Spezia. A diver who can suppress his breathing can overcome an entire nation. Durand is looking at the sunrise as he takes off the mask which prevents bubbles. He considers its simple construction, the rubber darkened by oil, the glass scored by both anxiety and belief. The internal components which remove carbon dioxide are still faintly reacting, with a residual taste of being alive. He throws the mask into the sea. It descends slowly, disappearing within the shimmering water. La Spezia is disappearing from view, the ascending smoke resembling spirits, recalling the night their sound was eliminated. For the remainder of Durand's life, whenever he closes his eyes, he will hear nothing, but he will always be aware of that silence.